It really depends on the situation and which World Cup you're talking about. Generally speaking, from an economic point of view, there's not a good economic return from hosting the World Cup. One could say, however, that there is a psychic, social, or emotional return, and that really depends upon how the people in the country feel about it. It can be very exciting to have the world's best soccer players in the competition amongst the countries in the World Cup, especially for soccer fans. There's also a lot of disruption. There'll be a lot of traffic congestion. There might be, unfortunately, there might be security incidents. Some governments feel it necessary to remove homeless people from the streets, so there's not any bad images that are produced during the national or the international telecasting of the event. So there are really a number of variables that enter into that discussion. But as a general proposition, I'm an economist, and the economic evidence does not suggest that a host, or in this case, 4 host countries, should expect an economic benefit from hosting the game.
And what about tourism? Because it is generally said that a World Cup can have positive effects on tourism. Is that true in short or long terms?
Sometimes it has a positive effect, sometimes it doesn't. Now, interestingly, according to the figures that the Brazilian government put out, there was a substantial increase in tourism, according to their figures, in 2014. But you have to, assuming those figures are right, and by the way, there's other figures about airport arrivals and so on that seem to contradict that. But let's assume that there was a substantial uptick in travel to Brazil. Was that an economic benefit to the Brazilian economy? Well, it doesn't seem so. And the reason is because there were, I can't remember which teams it was, but I think Argentina and Uruguay were in the semifinals, or at least they got out of the group stage to the knockout stage, at least. And so what happened, as far as I've been able to discern, is that young travelers from surrounding countries that were excited to see their country's team in the World Cup, in the final games of the World Cup, they traveled by truck, by car, by motorcycle to Rio. And what did they do? They slept on the beach, and they used bathrooms on the beach, and they might have bought hot dogs or tamales or simple food. And so instead of spending the anticipated $500 or $1,000 a day, they were spending $10 a day. So there was a lot of tourism, perhaps, that increased, but the economic impact on Rio, at least, and on Brazil in general, was not appreciable. And in fact, the presence of all these extra people meant that there was more congestion and more security costs connected. The question is not whether they'll happen or not, but how large an overrun they'll be. Now, in the case of Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina, and Chile, none of these countries, to my knowledge, has a stadium of 80,000 capacity. In Chile, they don't have stadiums even of 60,000 capacity. The 2 stadiums in Santiago are their largest, and I think they're under 50,000 each. In Uruguay and Paraguay, they don't have 80,000. I don't think they have 60,000 either. In Argentina, they have at least one. The Juan Domingo Perón Estadio is at least 60,000. So they have one. Now, as you know, the World Cup, FIFA requires there to be a stadium of 80,000 capacity for the opening game and the concluding competition. And they also want a 60,000 capacity for the semifinals. Beyond that, it's not just expanding capacity, but FIFA will require certain amenities at each stadium. They'll require a certain amount of club and luxury seating at the stadiums. They'll require a certain amount of space for security. They'll require a certain amount of space for the media. And it's not just the stadiums, but the access to the stadiums that will also be important to FIFA. If the South American countries in question are to win FIFA's approval, they're going to have to convince FIFA that it's going to be convenient, and there'll be good amenities, and there'll be good security controls. It's not just a matter of increasing the number of seats. So there are we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of investments from probably all of the countries involved. And an important question to ask is, to what extent will Chile and Argentina and Paraguay and Uruguay, to what extent will they benefit from having the larger stadiums with greater amenities going forward? To what extent do they have, is there such a demand for the soccer or football stadiums? Is there such a demand that they realize that they needed to have these larger capacities anyway? And my sense is no, they're not in that situation. And how does one know that they're not in a situation where they needed the larger stadiums anyway? The way we know that is because it hasn't happened. Absent the World Cup, Chile has been perfectly happy with the stadiums that they have. They've been sufficient. Same thing with the other three countries. So if it hasn't been done until now, it means that it's not economically viable to do it until now. And if it's not economically viable until 2029, why will it all of a sudden be something that's important to have and be economically viable in 2031? I don't think so. So it looks to me, although, the devil is always in the details are important here. It looks to me like there's a very substantial amount of financial risk and financial investment here that I'd be very cautious about. In Brazil, there was a lot of political contestation and tension and debate around that. And what they ended up doing was going to many cities that didn't even have national soccer teams and building new stadiums that cost $300 million, or going to places like Manaus, where they have a third tier soccer team. And the third tier soccer team that used to have an attendance of 1,000 people. Or in Brasilia, they built the 60,000 plus capacity stadium. And again, I think they had a third tier soccer team there. So there's a lot of building that was to impress FIFA that really made no economic sense whatsoever. So I think that's going to be a very important thing to look at with regard to this bill.